Hello, everyone. Welcome to Expanded Horizons. This is our May webinar in the Southern New South Wales Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovations Hub Expanded Horizons series. And this is brought to you by Charles Sturt University, supported by the Australian Government Future Drought Fund. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wagaya people, who are the traditional custodians of the land that I'm joining you from today, and also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which each of you is joining us. I pay my respects to elders both past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any other Indigenous Australians who may be present today. My name is Prue Cook. I'm from Nine Creeks Consulting, and I'm your host across this series. And in this webinar series, it's for those of us who work with farming and regional communities, from policy to the paddock, and it challenges us to think differently regarding how we approach engagement, extension and adoption in Southern New South Wales. Through the series, we explore novel thinking and new ideas from different sectors, industries and countries to stimulate new approaches to collaboration and building rural resilience. Our guest from today is joining us from across the ditch, so I'm going to put the communications down to New Zealand technology there, Callum, although you do tend to have better internet than we do. So Dr Callum Eastwood works in feed and farm systems at Dairy NZ, and he's going to talk to us about some of his recent research into co-design, and specifically co-design with farmers, and how co-design models and processes that have been developed in other sectors work or don't work when you take into account the complexity of agricultural systems. Now, if you've participated in one of these webinars before, this isn't a death by PowerPoint exercise. Callum and I have a conversation about his work, so hopefully this makes it accessible if you're traveling, or a bit easier if you're listening to the recording down the track. We invite you to ask questions or share your own experiences through the chat function at any time. Thank you for letting me know about the tech challenges earlier, although we were pretty acutely aware that they were happening. And you're also going to be sent a recording of this webinar after it finishes, so don't worry if it finishes early, and I'm going to have to edit out that first little bit as well too. So Callum, over to you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that it's 5 o'clock in New Zealand at the moment, so thank you for staying a little bit late to come and talk to us today. You've worked on a huge range of different projects in the dairy industry. You've done a lot in tech adoption, you're doing some stuff in workplace productivity. You've even worked on pastures in space. Tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do.
And just let me know if you can't
coming through
hear
nice
me.
And clear.
Good, yeah. Firstly, it was pastures from space. Pastures in space is a whole different challenge. Yeah. I work at Dairy NZ, which is a levy-funded organisation. I guess a little bit similar, like to Dairy Australia, as you'll all know. All dairy farmers in New Zealand pay a levy, and that funds some of our work. And I'm in the research team here. Spent 10 years in Melbourne at the University of Melbourne doing similar work, including pastures from space and some work around robotic milking and things like that, looking at like adoption and practice change on farm. And I've been back here in New Zealand and at Dairy NZ for almost 9 years. And I guess over that time, we obviously work closely with farmers, being levy funded, and always looking for, I guess, better ways to connect with farmers, and have kind of research and extension outcomes that fit better with what's going to make a change on farm.
So you're definitely in the right place then in this webinar series. We always kick off these webinars with a little bit of a 101 to go over terminology and concepts, particularly recognising that we hopefully have some new extension practitioners in our midst. So this conversation today, we're going to base around a paper that you published in late 2021, which was on co-design processes in the context of complex agricultural problems. Now, I just want to mention that paper is not open access, so unfortunately we can't share that with you today, but I will be sharing the abstract, and we'll be sharing a handout which has some key co-design tools, so you will still be able to get access to some of that through today, and we're certainly going to cover it in at length. So we visited co-design as a standalone webinar with Joe Eady last year, who I can see is on the line, and it's also come up as a theme in several other previous webinars. But for anyone who hasn't attended one of these webinars before, in a nutshell, what is co-design?
I guess my co-design is working with end users and stakeholders to come up with the solutions that whatever context you're looking in. I guess when we think about co-design, it's more about sort of human-centered design and design thinking kind of processes. But I guess the concept of co-design is just in the same family as participatory kind of action research and all of those kind of things, where you're collaboration, co-production, all these things where you're trying to work with the relevant people on any particular problem. And I guess the co-design part is just something that we've been trying over the last sort of 5 or 6 years to improve some of those sort of engagement processes and end outcomes.
And so co-design doesn't have its origins in agriculture. In what context have a lot of co-design models and processes been developed?
Yeah, I think again the code, when I sort of think of co-design, I'm thinking of the human-centered design, and a lot of that came out of sort of software development, technology development, sort of the business world, where I guess people were trying to design better products that suited what their market was looking for. And I guess probably it had come from years of designing stuff that wasn't needed or didn't sell. And so this idea of really focusing on the end user and also testing ideas quickly with those end users. So trying to understand what people wanted in any particular context, but then pretty quickly playing it back to them with a I guess a prototype or a concept, saying, "Is this what you meant?" And then them saying, "Yeah, sort of, but actually I wanted this and this." So it's a process that's quite iterative.
And so why was this the topic of your paper important to you? What do you think co-design can offer agriculture?
I guess the reason that we ended up publishing that paper was just that we had done some work in a few projects, and in that paper we talk about 2 particular projects, but where we would try to apply this sort of human-centered approach, and it found, I guess, it had some strengths and weaknesses, and just thought there was a real opportunity to, I guess, when you write up a paper, you sort of have to really refine your thinking around things. So really think about what our reflections were on what worked and what didn't, and I guess make them accessible to other people.
Now let's quickly talk about some terminology which might pop up today. Your paper discusses affordances. What's an affordance?
Yeah, I mean, it's a technical term, and because we tried to publish this as an academic paper, we had to use some academic terms, being a bit facetious, but essentially what we did in that paper is we were looking at what affordances parts of the co-design process provide to the process or to the outcomes. And so how I think of affordances is kind of what does any particular sort of part of the process or tool in the co-design process, what is that providing to the user? What is that providing to the process? So whether it's helping you sort of empathize with the end user, or provide some kind of visioning of what the end solution might be. So what is the function of what you're doing? And then also we'll probably discuss, and it's certainly mentioned in your paper, empathy and empathy stages in co-design. They're a recurring theme. And so what does empathy mean in the context of human-centered design? Yeah, I mean, empathy is sort of what empathy, the definition of empathy, in that it's, I guess, listening to others and understanding the user. So when you think of design thinking, there's several stages, and the first stage is the empathy stage, and it's I guess the importance of it is that you're listening to the end user. In our case, it's usually farmers, and there's usually a particular context that we're operating in. So whether it's creating a better workplace or getting better grazing management outcomes, that first empathy phase is sort of sitting down, whether it's formal or informal interviews or short phone calls about that topic, and just sort of exploring what is going on in that topic.
So we love practical examples here at Expanded Horizons, and your paper looked at a number of case studies. So there's 2 case studies in the paper, which we're going to discuss, but you're also working on a third project at the moment, which is really heavily using co-design. So what are the 3 case studies that what are those 3 projects exploring?
Yeah. So the 2 that we covered in the paper, one was about trying to create better workplaces. So we obviously have a real challenge across agriculture in most countries of finding people to work on our farms. And so we were exploring how do we create a workplace that's more attractive and will retain people. So that was the first context, and we can talk a little bit about how we sort of went about that project. The second project was quite a lot bigger, I would say. It's about redesigning farm systems. So we obviously have a lot of challenges around environment and animal care and financial factors and things. It was a really sort of big picture project about how would we really rethink our dairy farm systems. And so we applied a form of co-design to that project. And the third one that's not in the paper that we're in the middle of at the moment is about how do we reduce sprain and strain injuries on farm, because there's quite a lot of sprain and strain injuries that occur on dairy farms. And so we've got a 3-year project. We're about halfway through, where we've really applied co-design across that project.
And why co-design for those 3 approaches?
I think particularly the sprains and strains one, we were really focused on kind of tangible, actual physical outcomes, like effectively kind of engineering solutions on farm. And so it really lends itself to creation, like prototyping and iterating. The workplace one, sort of similar. We wanted to have a process where people really thought outside of the box, and design thinking can help with that, because you really do try and do that empathy and prototyping stages quite explicitly. And the redesigning dairy farm systems one, we used a version of co-design called reflective interactive design, which is something that came out of the Netherlands, and it's a much more in-depth approach for those really gnarly kind of problems. So that's why we chose that one.
So I want to go into the co-design tools now that you used and tested in those case studies. Your paper's got a really fantastic table of tools, and we've developed that into a handout, which I'm going to share now. But let's focus on the tactics that were most effective, especially for farmers. Yes.
In terms of the tools? Yeah. I guess there's a range, and I guess my first comment on that would be, especially if you're using kind of the design thinking approach, it's really common and quite cool at the moment, I guess, design thinking. And so there's a lot of potential processes you can use with design thinking, and in that table you'll see that we've sort of listed our experiences with many of them, and I guess some work better than others, and some things that we've found that are useful are really the kind of how might we question approach. So once you've done your empathy stage and you've sort of pulled your themes together about what you're hearing about what's happening in let's say a reducing sprains and strains context, then you try and you'll end up with heaps of stuff, and the bigger your context is, the more nuanced there'll be, and it'll just about be impossible to work out where to target your effort. So the how might we questions really focus you down on how might we shorten the length of the day on the dairy farm? How might we make it so people don't have to pick up calves? These kind of things, yeah. So that's one example.
And you also mentioned when we were preparing for this that quick prototyping was something that you found really effective. So again, for the newer practitioners in the audience, what are we meaning by quick prototyping?
It can really be anything. That's kind of the cool thing about the prototyping. And I think maybe that I was thinking today, maybe that's where some of these co-design practices differ from some of the other kind of collaboration participatory practices. What the difference is between them, in that we go through trying to understand what the problem is, and then you can pretty quickly sort of mock up, okay, what might a sort of a solution be, and it can be quite tangible, or it can be intangible. It can be something like a new course to help build leadership within our farm teams, and there's more processes with that part of co-design, but you then can describe what your prototype looks like, and it's just on a piece of paper, or you can use tactile processes to build a version of your
Perfect.
prototype, and then you can feed that back to, in our case, the farmers, and say, oh, how does this look? And then you've got something for them to engage with. And then you iterate that prototype.
Excellent. I have been thinking prototyping is something that's penciled in as a future webinar topic. So if anyone's listening in and they'd like to learn a little bit more about prototyping, and you'd like to see that as a future webinar, give me a thumbs up, and we can bring that forward a little bit. The other thing, when we were discussing some of your tactics that that you thought would miss, there was one in particular that you thought would miss the mark, but it came out to be quite successful, which was taking a group of farmers to Auckland for a field trip. Can you talk us through that one?
I thought you were going to not tell me what I'd said, and I was going to try and remember what it was. It was in that workplace project, and we can talk a little bit later about the commitment around funding to really fund the length of co-design. But we were lucky in the workplace project to be using design thinking and to have enough runway in the project that we did the empathy, we did the prototyping, and we could go through to actually building up some of those prototypes with the farmers and applying them on farm. So we were kind of struggling with how to structure the start of the process, and it's all around sort of workshops and getting people off farm, and we came up with this idea that we would actually, so it's about how do we bring novel approaches to our dairy workplaces. So we thought, right, let's take the group, that was about 10 farmers, to Auckland. They were from Canterbury, so it's it's a trip up to the North Island, and it's not that farmers haven't been to the city, but like taking the group and really immersing them in a large telecommunications company, a large software company, getting sort of some senior people from various companies to come and talk to us up there. That really actually worked. We weren't sure how it would go, and but what did work out of that was we'd had a couple of co-design workshops before we went away to Auckland, and we were kind of struggling to get people to get sort of out of the here and now and get past their initial thoughts about what their solutions and prototypes would be. And then after that field trip, I think we sort of just really sort of blew things wide open, because they saw what others were doing, and they saw that there were similarities in some of those large corporate workplaces, but they also saw where there was a difference between agriculture and where you could kind of make the most of that difference. And so we thought it was really successful, but we had a lot of feedback from the farmers that they really enjoyed that and really enjoyed seeing those other workplaces.
And you also mentioned that there was a specific tangible outcome that came from that, in terms of taking a process from agile project management and trying to apply it to dairy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of the companies that we went to visit, and it's amazing when you ask if you can come and visit, they sort of just opened up to us and just gave us like a 3-hour tour, and we saw sort of so much about how they were using agile processes. And one of the things that the farmer team saw was a Kanban board. So if anyone knows Kanban, it's kind of a task scheduling process where you put your jobs in either to do, doing, or done effectively. And yeah, some of the farmers really thought that was a great idea, and we ended up actually building that prototype up. And now if you want to know about Kanban, go to the Dairy NZ website. We have some videos, we have how-to guides, and we have farmers using that approach to kind of solve one of the challenges around workplaces, which is getting the ideas out of the owner or manager's head and engaging and empowering the team to do jobs and make decisions. And so, yeah, it was really successful link out of that.
I love it, and it's so simple as well too. Fantastic. What did you find missed the mark a bit with co-design? What are some of the tools, or where are the things that if you don't consider certain aspects of the farming community, you're going to have a bad time?
Yeah, so having said that, there's a lot of tools with co-design that can be a problem, and that what we have learned over the years is, I guess we've understood parts of co-design much better as the kind of research team at Dairy NZ, and we don't do these processes ourselves. We usually get a facilitator in who knows how to run those kind of processes, and we support effectively. We support with the farmers and on the day, and taking the ideas after the day. But we've learned we have to sort of really engage in the planning of these workshops and events to make the processes the right processes. So yeah, we found early on we were putting far too many things in. We were prototyping personas, all these things, and kind of more or less tick box way through co-design, and we had some pretty bad feedback from the farmers that they didn't enjoy that, and we didn't get good outcomes until we kind of started to say, right, what do we actually need for this particular session?
And thank you for sharing what doesn't work, because I think there's some really valuable learnings that come in from there. So what conclusions did you draw, Callum? Can we effectively use co-design models that are developed elsewhere for ag, or are we a bit too different, and are our problems a bit too complex?
Well, we're still using them, so I think that's an answer there. I think you do, they don't fit every context, and I guess you have to sort of understand enough about what you can achieve with some of these human-centered design practices, and essentially the idea of whether your project has the runway to make use of them. So if you're just doing a one-off workshop, and we actually still use co-design practices for one-off workshops, but we know we're not really getting the most out of them. What you really want is, like we have with our Sprains and Strains project, you have 3 years to go all the way through, from having enough time to do the empathy, have workshops around co-design and initial prototyping, get those made up, and again, if you want to see more in the links that we'll provide, we have a web page about that project, and you can see where we've got to with the prototypes, that actually we have physical things that farmers are testing on farm and giving us feedback. And I think that's where it works best, when you really can use that iterative kind of part of the process.
Now, I'm just going to share a link with everybody to your abstract now, so that people can have a look at this. And if you click on what I've just popped on the screen, you should be able to go down and download the graphical abstract for Callum's paper. So your paper proposes that successful involvement of farmers through farmer-centred co-design is influenced by 6 key co-design affordances. So let's have a quick chat through each of them now. The first one is engaging.
Yeah, so I'll take my mind back to when I wrote this paper, but which was a long time ago, really. The engaging part we learned, and it applies to a lot of our different kind of collaborative processes, but that we got better results when we put a lot of effort up front in engaging the farmers and other stakeholders, and not always farmers, about what we were trying to achieve, also understanding them. And even in the workplace project, when we built our co-design team, we actually made a short list. We got those farmers to more or less self-select we put a call out, and then we actually more or less interviewed them and chose the ones we thought would work as a team. So and so when they got into the kind of co-design process, they were already a little bit kind of up to speed.
Okay, and the next one was framing.
Yeah, so framing is, I guess, in an affordances kind of language, what comes out of the empathy stage. So really trying to frame up the problem essentially, and spend enough time understanding what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's also one thing that we've seen from co-design. It's a really difficult stage because people just want to get on and tell you what their ideas are and create something. But we all know that you can do that, and you can get to the end of your process and it actually solve the wrong
very
problem.
Common.
So there's this tension about effectively holding people back, and sometimes it's horrible to watch with farmers or whoever we have in the room, because often they're quite action orientated and they just want to get on, and we're kind of saying, yep, well, let's just now dig in a bit deeper and try and understand what's really going on.
And how do you manage that tension?
Well, I mean, we'll talk about the facilitator probably a bit later, but it really is key that the facilitator can manage speeding up and slowing down around that, I think, because you can't just get stuck on your process and say, no, we're doing this for another day. And what we've started to do is put little release valves in, really, and have okay, we'll after lunch we'll do a little bit of prototyping, and then we'll go back and just do a bit more sort of framing, understanding the problem. So let's get some of your ideas out, so you feel heard, and we get a first kind of group of ideas, but then let's sort of go back.
I really like that concept of a release valve, because that's allowing farmers who are very action oriented to be able to get out and feel like they've had their ideas heard, but still allow the process to do what it needs to in terms of correctly framing the issue that you're trying to solve. Release valve, I'm going to remember that one.
Because what also will happen is the people that will turn up are the ones that are engaged in that topic. So they've probably already thought about it, and they probably already have ideas. So obviously for all of us, it can be painful to sit there through someone doing a bit of a warm-up presentation and then some kind of other process, and you have a really good idea. You just like to let people know about it.
All right. The next one was visioning and exploration. And I think this is obviously where your Auckland trip fits in.
Yeah, so I guess that's about ways to expand what you're thinking, because we do get stuck in our own day-to-day experiences and contexts, and we may kind of think the world works a certain way, and I guess that's the point of getting groups together, is to bounce off each other. And so there can be a range of ways of doing that. And one other, the field trip was great, but we've also seen, and particularly coming out of places like the Netherlands, the idea of having an artist in the room. We've done this with some of our projects who draws up what they're hearing, and then you get the team to engage around these, either a drawing of kind of prototype, or drawings that depict what the problem is, and just a different way of engaging around sort of visual representations.
The next one is visualization.
Well, that's probably that
Or,
one. Yeah,
extending.
Yeah, and this is linked to the other ones where you're just is trying to push ideas out, so sort of expand what you're doing, and this can be quite a hard sort of phase. But I think doing that iterative prototyping, we think we know what the answer is, and then we put something together and we're like, no, that's not it. And so you're really trying to, I guess, expand the context, and I guess it's where the novel stuff comes in.
And the last one is anchoring.
Yeah, so an anchoring really comes from that reflective interactive design that we did with the Redesigning Dairy Systems project. It's quite a key part of that process, and it really sort of speaks to the fact we often do these processes and have these workshops and come up with ideas, and then the music kind of stops, and everybody goes home, and maybe the funding stops. And we've had several examples of that, even with the co-design, that we just haven't got to the next phase. So anchoring is the process of I guess getting those ideas and getting them getting some sort of traction within, in our case, within the dairy sector. And so I think having farmers and other stakeholders in a co-design team is you're sort of starting your anchoring, because we often then test out the ideas on those farmers' properties. So you've got some buy-in, but with the Redesigning Dairy Farm Systems, the anchoring was the hardest part, because we came up with quite different concepts, which would mean changes in supply chains and what people grew on farm, and that stuff needs a lot of change in the sector, and so you'd need to put a lot of effort into sort of getting buy-in or anchoring.
And how were those ideas that you co-designed received? Because it obviously sounds like it wasn't quite expected if it's, big structural or big, practice changes. How was that received when you went back and said, this is what we found, or this is what the co-design team have found?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends what your desired outcome is. I think with the Redesigning Dairy Systems project, that the legacy of it has kind of lived on, even if we didn't end that project with some of these things being actually tried out on farm, but we sort of presented them back to farmer groups, and they were really a great way of engaging other farmers. So because those quite sort of system change ideas really engage, but positively and negatively, they really get people talking. And so if it's about reducing body carbs, or growing different crops on farm, or whatever, you really can get people talking by sort of saying, here's a vision of what the future might look like, and what do you think?
Let's get into some questions around key considerations in practice. Recurring theme in both this webinar series and also at a recent hub forum, which was held in Wagga at the end of March, is the challenges associated with getting farmer engagement in the first place. So what's your advice for getting farmers involved in the first place?
It's a real challenge, I guess, with any of these processes where you're asking people to come off farm often. We talked about that engaging kind of step. I think that's quite important, particularly if you're asking people to be part of a co-design team that is going to meet quite a few times. So with our workplace project, we met, it was 5 days off farm, I think, including that field trip. over about 3 months. That's quite a commitment. And with our Sprains and Strains project, it was 3 workshops over a year and a half. So still, we're asking people to come off farm, and so really spending time to talk to them about what you're trying to achieve, but also I think the co-design process also offers farmers something that you're really looking for, sort of tangible outcomes that will be tested on farm or something similar. And so they can see, okay, if I'm going to be involved in this, it's going to actually lead to something. I guess then it has to actually lead to something, you have to deliver on that, but it's not, you're not just going to turn up, give us your ideas, and you'll never hear from us again.
Excellent. And you mentioned when we were prepping for this webinar as well too, that you don't use the term co-design when you're talking to farmers. Do you use something instead, or how do you sell getting involved in the process?
It probably depends. When we've talked about it to other farmers, and in some of our sort of TRNZ social media and things, we just call it innovation processes or innovation workshops and things like that, because or collaboration. Sometimes we'll talk about co-design, but I'm conscious that we kind of live in that world, and that the word co-design might not mean much to farmers.
And you mentioned at the beginning as well too, participatory action research and co-design, and was having a conversation recently about using participatory action research when talking to researchers instead of using co-design. Is there a difference between participatory action research and co-design?
Well, I just think, again, when I think of co-design, I'm thinking of that human-centered design. I just think the difference is that it can be quite deliberate, the stages that you go through, and deliberate and iterative. That's where I see the difference.
So I'm sorry, Theo, I've got to jump on your question that you've just popped in there, which is many of the tools have different names for practices or tools, or a slight spin on those already used in participatory approaches. So what are the unique steps or tools in co-design that suits farmers that are different to good participatory approaches, and what do these unique steps, tools deliver? So I think I've just got to jump on that one.
Yeah, and I probably, not sure of the real distinct comparisons, but go back to the earlier point that these kind of processes will work well in some contexts, and I guess it's just about sort of learning enough about the processes to work out, is this going to be good in this context?
Should we be including farmers in the entire co-design process, or just components of it? Because you've mentioned that time commitment's a big thing, and farmers are busy people. So when do you involve farmers?
Yeah, I think the way we've talked about it with farmers before is that they're our where we get our ideas from. They're the grounding of the ideas, and a sounding board, those kind of things. Our role in these projects is to, in between engagements with the farmers, is to go away, chase up ideas, build things that we've heard, sort of put things together, do, if it's empathy, do the analysis and things in those phases, and bring the co-design team back together when we have something to work on. Yeah, and I think it's great if you can do it so that people follow you through the process, because then they see that something has come out of the effort that they've put in, and also they probably pretty open to try these things out on their farms to give you some feedback about whether they really work in practice.
For everybody listening in, now's the time to get some questions in. So if you've got a burning question, type them in. We've got a bit over 10 minutes left, so we will have some time for Q&A, but now's the time to start getting your questions in. should we be paying farmers to participate in co-design activities?
Yes, it's a hard one to answer. Yeah, we've tangled with this question, and I don't know that we've come up with a position on it yet. Yeah, I think I hope that usually when we do things, there's enough value for farmers. We often sort of pull on it's industry good, and this will help the industry, and therefore hoping farmers will come because they care about the industry moving forward in whatever particular area we're looking at. I think there is a case, especially if you're asking for their time repeatedly, to find some way of helping make it easier for them. And the way we have thought about that, and actually we haven't put this into practice, but we have thought a lot about it, is effectively supporting them somehow so their jobs still get done on their farm on that day while they're away, with relief, like a relief milker or something like that. But you can get all sorts of issues with trying to do those things. So essentially we just try and make it a valuable process, a bit of vouchers and things like that, and but interested to see what other people are doing around that.
Theo's got another question about which tools worked well. So obviously the visualization and the tour stood out. Any others? We've mentioned that how might we statements were really effective, and that the prototyping was really effective. Was there anything else on that list of 14 that was a real good standout in working really effectively?
Yeah. And I just want to apologise. I've in our scramble to get up, I get this online. I changed webcams, so I'm now, the sun is going down. That's why I'm getting darker and darker.
Look, we made it work in the long run, Callum. That's all that matters. So.
Yeah. I'm currently looking out to the sunset in my house. Other things that work. So sort of how might we use the prototyping? I think, again, it depends on what you're doing. In some of our earlier work, we did these things called journey maps, which is trying to sort of follow, maybe a farmer's year or a day on a, let's say when they're doing grazing management, what sort of happens when they're making decisions around grazing management. When we've tried that, sometimes it's just been like, like pulling teeth, essentially. Like, people are tired and it's like, it doesn't make sense. But a few months ago, we did it with a group, and it worked brilliantly. And we're actually now using the journey maps that they created to kind of create a digital dashboard approach for this project that we're doing. So I think it can be difficult to work out what is going to work, but I guess if you're sort of thinking about what are we trying to achieve here, in that case, we would sort of narrowed things down enough that we knew we wanted to focus on like grazing management and heat stress. And so we've used the journey mapping approach to dig into, well, what do people do, and therefore where do they need information in that daily or yearly journey.
I really like journey mapping. I use it a lot myself, and particularly like to use it when I'm working with service providers or researchers to help them get into the mindset of a farmer and go, okay, what are the steps that you'd like a farmer to take here, and how likely is it that what are they going to come up against in taking those steps? So big fan of journey mapping. Another question from John: what's the one thing you think people often get wrong when using co-design with farmers?
I think it goes back to that process part, and so sort of linked to a lot of what we've talked about, that because it's been developed outside of agriculture in particular contexts, and it's very popular. There's all these structures around it, and there's all these processes that you can just pull off the internet to use, and being overly process driven, I think, is one of the bigger risks.
Perfect. Another question from Linda. Do you try to have a gender balance in the farmer groups that you co-design with?
I guess we try and have diversity in whatever form, and again, depending on the context. So if we're talking about workplaces, gender, we have quite a few ethnicities working on our dairy farms in New Zealand, and definitely age and role on farm. But to be honest, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to get farm owner managers to these kind of things, and than it is to get employees. That you really have to work hard to get employees, and to get employees who will feel comfortable participating when they're in a room, and maybe the processes can actually help people who operate, a little bit more introvert or extrovert type thing, and that probably goes back to that engaging part as well. That to get the right kind of diversity, you need to put in a lot of effort before you start ringing people about what kind of people do we want. Work with your networks to make those short lists of people, and then start inviting them.
Now, this next question is a term that I've never heard of, so I'm going to be very interested. Have you any experience with fuzzy cognitive mapping in co-design? And where is its value or risk? Joseph, you're going to need to explain to us what fuzzy cognitive mapping is, please.
We are looking at actually a lot at the concept of cognitive load in some of our work, but not
yeah. Joseph, please, if you've got a link or something that you could share, you've got my interest, very much so. Now, where might tension arise between farmers and other participants, and how can this be managed?
Well, I think there's a few areas where there's potential tension. There's tension amongst the people you might get in the room, and there can be tension between us as people kind of running projects and the people that are in the room in terms of what we're trying to achieve. I actually think you actually want a little bit of tension amongst the people that you invite, and you sort of want different perspectives. And so if you can have, so if it works and you have, farmers and particular representatives of particular groups, different stakeholders that bring different perspectives, I think that's where you get if you're looking for new ideas, that's where you get new ideas. People have to be comfortable with being challenged as well. And one thing we have used is the idea of a wild card person. In some of our work, we've just invited someone who's not even really that connected to agriculture, but maybe they know a lot about workplace practices. If we're confident that that person can work in the team and can not sort of get caught up in the fact that they don't know the ins and outs of what happens on a farm, they also can bring in quite a lot of new ideas. But also, I think it does add interest to the farmers that you invite, because they are meeting someone new, hearing some different things, and therefore they leave at the end of the day having sort of thought about things differently.
Excellent. And very last question. So your paper discussed the importance of facilitator selection. What should we be looking for in a co-design facilitator?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that we've seen, obviously they need to be pretty confident with the process, and we tried to use people that knew a lot about design thinking and use them to run the reflective interactive design process. And it was a bit of a challenge because it's kind of different. And so we had to kind of end up doing a mashup of the two processes. And, they have to understand that the goal is to achieve a certain thing, and that therefore you pick the processes that fit that. And then also, just like any good facilitator, the ability to actually read the room, speed up, slow down, move the group on, make sure everyone's voice can be heard, those kind of things, as well as knowing how to do the co-design.
Perfect. All right. Now, usually at this point, we have a bit of a show and tell. So any resources, etc., because obviously a 1-hour webinar is not enough to become an expert in this. So I'm just going to share some links in the chat section now that Callum has shared with me that you can go away and have a bit of a look at, learn a little bit about the projects that Callum's discussed today, and do a little bit of further reading. So Callum, thank you so much for your time today. Apologies for the technical issues at the start. It's all fun. And thank you to our audience for joining in. Thank you for your wonderful, wonderful questions. So we hope that this has stimulated your thinking. And if you're planning on doing something different from today's information, we'd love to hear it in the comments. I'm now going to pop up the registrations for our next 2 webinars, and I'm going to start with June. So we'll be joined by Michael Thompson from CQU's Institute of Future Farming Systems, and we're going to explore if new industries need new extension approaches. We're going to have a look at how Michael and his team are developing extension programs to support hazelnuts, hemp, insects, sesame, seaweed and native foods as part of the AgriFutures Emerging Industries program. So you can have a look at that one now. We're going to look at the needs for emerging industries, what information is needed and in what formats, how to embed storytelling, agents of change and nudge theory into extension approaches. And this is something that someone asked for in one of our exit surveys, was a bit more on behavioural change. We did some last year, but this is going to build on that. So that will all be there. And I'm now going to pop up our July webinar, which I think our presenter for that is on the line, or hopefully still on the line, is Dr. John James, and he's the Director of Enablers of Change. And we're going to have a look at how ChatGPT and other forms of AI might change how we do agricultural extension. So is the tech going to be a massive disruptor, or is it going to be a value add? I'm very, very much looking forward to the conversation. So once this webinar finishes, you'll be directed to a survey link. It would be very much appreciated if you could please fill it out for us. It doesn't take any more than a minute, and any suggestions that you have for future webinars, I do follow those up and take those very seriously. Hi, John, can see you're still here. Excellent. Thank you again for participating in today's Expanded Horizons webinar delivered by the Southern New South Wales Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.